Hello, listeners. Before we start today's episode, I have to tell you about an unbelievable new podcast coming to Forever Dog, this very network, that's going to blow your mind. It's called Beyond. And if you love the supernatural, horoscopes, aliens, ghosts, that kind of thing, you are not going to want to miss Beyond. Beyond follows comedian and producer Mike Kelton as he uses supernatural forces to solve everyday problems. Instead of just going to therapy like a normal person would, Mike works with witches, mediums, ghost hunters, cult leaders, healers, potion makers, and astrologers to answer questions like, can a witch solve his dog's aggression issues? I say no. Can a hypnotist cure Mike's Diet Coke habit? Probably yes. Can Mike use his powers as an empath to help exorcise a demon from his favorite thrift store in the East Village? I'm going to have to listen to that one to find out. You should listen to all of them to find out. In the first episode, Mike gets help from a medium to connect with his deceased grandfather to get advice on whether or not he should move in with his boyfriend. It's a terrific episode of podcasting, and it's available right now. So whether you're a believer or a skeptic, or clearly, like me, somewhere in the middle, join Mike Kelton for an open-minded, hilarious, and emotional journey through the incredible world of all things spiritual, spooky, and downright beyond. Can we put an effect on that? Can you keep in where I'm saying, can you put an effect on that? Can you keep in the part where I asked to keep it in? Subscribe to Beyond today on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Forever Dog.
A fascinating and endearing? Is that a weird word to use? These guests endeared themselves to me. I really enjoyed talking with today's guests, who are Sierra Ornelas, who is a comedy writer. She got her start on Happy Endings. She was on all 3 seasons, and she's most recently on Superstore and Splitting Up Together. We also have Monica Beletsky, who started out as a writer's assistant on Lost, and sort of worked her way on all kinds of interesting shows, including Friday Night Lights and Parenthood, Fargo. She has lots of cool stuff to talk about. And finally, Grainne Godfree, who has been writing superheroes from her start on the Tomorrow People through Flash and now Legends of Tomorrow. It really is a great conversation. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Before we get to that, let's talk to Andrew Miller. I'm now talking to Andrew Miller, television writer, comic book writer. You and I collaborated on a comic book, which was a lot of fun.
Yep.
Andrew, thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thanks for having me.
Andrew, you are the co-creator of The Secret Circle, the beloved and long-lost program on the CW. It was a show about witches. I really dug it.
You might call it the least successful witches show in the last 10 years, I think is the way I refer to it.
That's your claim to fame.
Yeah. Not many witch shows could only last 1 season, and somehow we managed to pull it off.
But it's crazy too, because it was such a good show. Like, first of all, you had this incredible cast, but also like it was a smart show, and you were doing fun takes on witches that I think hadn't really been explored before.
Thank you. My mom felt the same, and wasn't enough. But yes, we tried to do a fun, new-ish take. It's hard to find new territory with witches, but we tried our best.
That was the thing I kind of wanted to talk to you about. Is so you developed the show, you co-created it with Kevin Williamson, but when you guys started talking about this, like, what was the way in? How did you start to say, like, we can't do the same old witch tropes, so let's do this? Like, what did this look like?
Well, we had a series of books to start with. Mm-hmm. These very successful book series that I really loved. And what I took from that was just the pain of transitioning from child to adult. And that's what came across most in the book, just how hard it is. And that's what we tried to do with the TV show, that it's like that the transformation from a young adult to an adult is kind of magic in and of itself, that things grow and change, and you look different and you feel different. Like it's underrated in its majestic qualities or magic elements. So if you start with that, but it's also painful. It's painful both physically, it's painful certainly emotionally, and so that's where we started, was to try to get the reality back into teen witchcraft. And it was less about wands. Wasn't it all about wands? But at the time, like to contrast it with Harry Potter, something that I love, that was very much the magic. We wanted to ground the magic in a different way, that it wasn't just wands, it wasn't just a book, that magic was hard and had consequences, because at the crux of Secret Circle was this idea that the world is in some kind of balance, and you can take some of the energy in the world and use it, manipulate it to your liking, but there's a cost to it. And we tried to keep the cost present and relevant in everything, which was part of the problem of the series, by the way.
Oh, really?
Because, yeah, I think so. I think that if it were, I never wanted someone to be able to read a spell and something happened. Yeah. Because it just felt like, well, it's so easy. And what's the difference between a witch and someone who's reading a spell? And so what I wanted to do was to take different people who were in touch with different aspects of nature in different ways, and then add magic to that. So, but it was that it would be hard, that to create fire meant risking something, whether it was blood or emotional strife or humiliation or embarrassment, something. But I think that was the quality that people didn't like about this. that ultimately people were like, yeah, no, that makes sense. Can they just wave a magic wand? Because this is really just bumming us out.
That's interesting though, because that's not like that. That idea is in the stuff I've looked at in preparing for Hexwives, and also in the conversations I've had with other creators of TV and comics and stuff. Like that idea of limiting the magic and making there be sort of an emotional or physical stake in it feels like it's part and parcel to witch lore or to witch tropes.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I mean, the opposite of that is difficult, because I kept saying this isn't X-Men. They can't just, right. I used to liken, not just in witch project, but X-Men are, people who have the power of telepathy or can make things levitate. Is basically close-ups of people looking like they're farting, and then you cut to something happening. And I just find it annoying that you go, oh, look, they're really concentrating. And isn't that great? And then you don't see, I don't find it cinematic. I don't find it interesting. So, and I also felt my constant argument and again, I have to stress that the show only lasted 22 episodes and it's all my fault. But I kept saying, well, if people could do magic, if it was so easy, then why are they even going to school? Why do they do homework? Why do they eat? Why do they do anything? Like, why, if magic is so easy, why not just do magic I would do magic all the time. I would never bother with anything. Like, I wouldn't get dressed in the morning. I would just magically get dressed. Like, it didn't. Yeah. So if you start there and you say, well, then we have to, yes, people would say, you're right, Andrew, we can't do that. You have to limit it. And then I'd say, okay, so to do this spell, you really have to figure out the language properly, get the right things, invest enough of yourself. Like, let's say you wanted to do an intense spell that involved water. Someone who was naturally connected to fire, say, couldn't do it. And you'd have to find someone that had a connection to water. So that was the second part of our show, which was, I felt that it's hard to get 6 teenagers to agree on a restaurant, let alone magic. So let's add that to the mix, where you go, they're stronger together because they each have these organic, natural connections to the earth, and you're going to need all of them at some point. And so whether it's groups of 3 or 4 or 6, ultimately, you need a group to pull this stuff off, and therefore, but try to get them to agree on anything, because they have different personalities and they love and hate each other, and they're fighting.
There's a soap opera going on at the same time.
Yeah,
that's pulling them apart or putting them together.
But that's also what makes things difficult. That it just shouldn't be, magic shouldn't be easy, because then everybody would be doing it. So my hope was to add obstacles, both realistic, both emotional and physical, to make the series harder and more interesting. And ultimately, I think that was a big mistake, because they just wanted something funner, and they kept saying, like, why are they bleeding all the time? And I was like, well, it's they're not all the time, but if you want to, they couldn't resurrect people, but if you wanted to do something that bended the laws of nature, you have to, it costs something.
Right. You have to pay for it.
Yeah. So
that's what I really dug about the show. That was the thing. I remember it being very, like, the act of doing magic is very physical for the characters. And I thought it was something I hadn't really seen, because we had seen like Sabrina and Charmed, where Sabrina is played for laughs, or Charmed where it sort of comes pretty easily to them, and it's just sort of a device to work the soap opera plot. This incorporated both, and I think maybe that is what people found difficult.
I think that people that like the show really like that element and aspect, and it felt, and when it was successful, because it wasn't, because of this conflict, it was always hard to do what we really wanted to do. But I think the moments that we achieved something to at least toward this goal, I think it really resonated with people, and then it just wasn't enough people to keep it on the air.
I think it was a show that was a little ahead of its time in that way, where I think you'd have a much easier time now, where sort of genre stuff and even horror stuff is much more at the top front of viewers' minds, or even executive minds, where like they've seen enough that they can understand a small change to the tropes that they've seen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think if anything, the show was great for other people to say, hey, I can make a better show than that. And then they did. But no, at the time, there were only vampire shows, barely even werewolf shows. And I think people were like, werewolves are or vampires are so sexy. Look at vampires. And I kept saying, what? They just do the same thing over and over. They're just biting people. That's not fun. These kids are fun over here. And, but yeah, it was still like, nah, that's hocus pocus bullshit.
Yeah. Did you think of the show as a horror show?
No, but again, but I was aware of the horror element, and we used to say to directors, this is what the show is supposed to feel like, but please make your own little horror movie, I guess. So we constructed episodes that were all over the genre map. I think we had there's a Cabin in the Woods kind of episode, and there's one where they went back into their own memories. And so the going back in your memories isn't a horror premise, but it was horrific in the things that they found back there. So I think ultimately what I liked was tapping into the dark side of this in every episode. And that's a slippery slope to horror, but the intent was always, if you are going to try this life of magic, be prepared to be frightened by who you are and who you're going to come up against, because it's not all spells and robes. It's
not all wizard hats and wands.
There's no Quidditch in the Secret Circle. But
what you've described is such a great pitch. It's certainly stuff that I'm thinking about in doing the comic. It's stuff I know that I've seen sort of in this new Sabrina, in the new Charmed. It definitely feels like it's where witch tropes are now. So it's a very thoughtful take. And I think if people go back now and find Secret Circle, which I'm sure is streaming somewhere, that they will enjoy it. And it feels very contemporary, though it is, 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, I would love to know what some of your favorite pop culture witches are.
I think with Secret Circle specifically, when I saw The Craft, I was really blown away by how contemporary. I don't remember seeing something that was so of my generation in that way, where it felt what I liked about it was how realistic it felt, like with people awakening to powers that they shouldn't have. So I thought the way it was presented and the goth quality and was amazing.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, older, I don't know if this is witchy enough, but Ruth Gordon in Rosemary's Baby always stood out as like my kind of old witch lady. that she was so smart. And again, bringing it back to nothing was easy for those poor witches in Rosemary's Baby to conjure something, like to get what they wanted, to bring a dark power into a balanced world, took so much effort. And it felt, I liked in Rosemary's Baby that it felt like they were so committed, and yet at a certain point you just would believe if they just gave up because it's just too damn hard to make magic. But she was an effective, incredibly creepy witch that I liked a lot.
Yeah, that's a great one. That it's such a grounded and like character-based approach to the trope, right?
Yeah.
That you believe it, that they would stay with it, and you believe it even if they gave up. She would have been an amazing like gingerbread house witch.
Yeah, and by the way, we all have or have had grandparents and like I feel like my grandmother bringing these weird recipes from her childhood in Poland or Russia, like that all seem like witchcraft. And Ruth Gordon was someone where you're like, she's someone's grandmother, and I think hers are really witchcraft, her recipes. That's not just for a cold. That's to kill somebody. Yeah. So, and Angel Heart, I guess that's different voodoo, but yeah, it's a fun take on the material, right? It's something that hasn't been done as well very often. Like Angel Heart did that stuff really strongly. Yeah. And again, made it hard. Yeah. Like Angel Heart, nothing, you can't just slip up on a spell and turn something into a frog when you wanted to turn it into a toad. There are serious consequences, and that's what I like. Yeah, I think that's good advice for anyone, like especially for writers creating a magical world, which is a conversation I've had a lot lately, that like it just can't be easy. There have to be consequences, whether, again, it's physical or emotional or whatever. I think that's a really smart way to look at it. Okay, then to that, and I'm sure you'll have to cut this out anyway, but I think to that, one of the things that I really like that we did with Secret Circle, and I think should be present in almost all magic things, is that you will never find greater examples of magic than in nature. Mm-hmm. Like to start, the way seeds can become trees, the way things transform, the way nature can make things happen. I mean, it's really just a lot of magic. And I feel like when our show was successful, it was taking those principles and turning it and amplifying it and making it a bit more fun sometimes. But it always just seemed like the smart path because it felt grounded. It felt sort of real. And when you use those elements, I mean, I think real witchcraft, I think Wiccan, that nature is involved in Celtic rituals and all these things is no coincidence. So I always think it's a good place to draw from, as opposed to pure fantasy that's unhinged from the real world. So that's I think if I were doing more magic, that always starts there. I absolutely agree. And hearing you talk about it makes me want to see you take another stab at this material. Please go do more of this stuff. Look, man, you're a good writer and you're a good collaborator. So I want to see more of this cool stuff from you. Well, thank you. I'll try my best. Thank you for chatting with me about this stuff. It is always a pleasure to talk. Let's talk soon. Sure. Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Bye-bye. Now is the time for you to call up your local comic book shop and pre-order The Only Thing I Care About, my new Vertigo comic called Hexwives. It's about witches, and it's about gender politics. Does that sound fun? Probably not, but it is. The artist is amazing. The colorist is amazing. The editors are unbelievable. I'm just hanging on for dear life and hoping that people buy this so I can tell dozens and dozens of stories in this world. So please, call up your local comic book shop. If you don't know where it is, go to comicshoplocator.com, put in your zip code, and order that comic Hexwives. It comes out on Halloween. You just tell them you want it.
they'll hold a copy for you, and then you go to the store and buy it. It's easy. It's like $4. And I think you're going to like it. I do.
They write, they talk, and talk about what they write. Tune in tonight, or whenever the time is right. It's the Writers Panel with Ben Blacker, and it's starting now. Oh, yeah!
The way I'm going to begin is to ask you each to introduce yourselves on microphone. Tell us a little bit about where the listener may have seen your name on their television screen. And Sierra, let's start with you.
Okay, hi. My name is Sierra Ornelas. Before I start, Yate Sierra Ornelas Yunshe, Tabahe Nishle, Nakaidine Bashichin, Twahaglini Dishache, Do Nakaidine Dashanelli. My name is Sierra. I'm a member of the Navajo Nation. I'm born of the Edgewater clan and for the Mexican people. Honored to be here today. I have to say my clans whenever I speak in public, or else my family will be very mad at me. Yeah, and I'm a comedy writer. I started on a show called Happy Endings.
Now, hang on one sec.
Yes.
You say I'm a comedy writer, not in the usual embarrassed way that I see most comedy writers admit that.
Okay. Should I be embarrassed?
No. Where do you get your confidence in being a comedy writer?
Oh, I'm not confident in being a comedy writer. It's just that I am. I mean, I did it for it's the longest job I've had, not counting like restaurant work. So I feel like, no, I mean, I'm a comedy writer. I started in, I don't know. I started in 2010. I was on a show called Happy Endings. Worked there for all 3 seasons. I started out as a Disney fellow. So I got in through one of those awesome programs, but was lucky enough to sort of stay on and kind of hop across that whole sort of like a lot of, I find like a lot of, let me just start over. Anyway, whatever. So
and I apologize. We're going to get into this for one sec because it does come up a lot with these fellowships, and they're a great opportunity for many writers who may not otherwise have access.
Yeah, they're huge. It changed my life. So
absolutely. The other side of it is sort of you get staffed, you're free for a year to whatever show generally, and oftentimes you sort of have to make your way again after that.
Yeah,
so I'm glad they kept you on.
No, yeah, it was really lucky. Like I always kind of acknowledge the luck of that situation, and that I was on a show that was on for 3 seasons. So that's the other thing. Because after that, I worked on a couple of single season shows. Surviving Jack, which was a Justin Halper and Pat Shoemaker show. I worked on a show called Selfie. I worked on a show,
a beloved show.
Oh, I loved. I mean, it was one of my favorite jobs. Yeah. I worked on a show called The Hustle, which was Prentice Penny's first show before Insecure. Oh, right. He was a writer on Happy Endings. And then I got Superstore. I was on Superstore for all 3 seasons. It's still on. But now I've jumped over to a show called Splitting Up Together, which is on ABC.
Great. And in the meantime, you've been developing and selling
Developing and
like
doing my best to carry my tired wares around town. So, yeah.
We'll talk about
That's so hard to do both, though, I find. I have not been great at writing on the side of writing.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. It was kind of a nuts thing. I had a baby, and I was, like, terrified I was going to, like, be run out of the business. And so I was like he was like 4 days old, and I was so filled with hormones, and it was 3 a.m, and I just emailed my agents. I was like, I don't want to disappear, like find me something. And I was like freaking out, and then that's how my development started. But I really don't think I would have done it had I not been like afraid of the whole situation. So yeah, it's a lot.
That's so funny. Good. We'll get into it. Grainne.
My name is Grainne Godfree. I started on the Tomorrow People, then was on Flash for 2 years, and now I have been on DC's Legends of Tomorrow for 4 years. And
God, has that been on for 4 years?
Awesome.
Yeah. This will be our 4th year.
Right.
I feel like we've finally found our groove. I'm always telling people, if you watch it at the beginning, give it another shot.
But people love this show. I mean, I feel like that whole universe of CW superhero shows, like people are in for all of them and maybe don't even differentiate among them.
Yeah, I feel like our fans are kind of the underdog B-team kind of fans, because usually Flash, Supergirl, Arrow get all the love. But Legends is such a wonderful place to work. And,
good.
Yeah.
That's good to hear. And I do want to get into it because we've had some Flash and Arrow writers, and I'm curious how Legends is doing things differently or the same. So we'll get to that in a minute. But Monica.
I'm Monica Beletsky, and I wrote on Friday Night Lights, Parenthood, Leftovers, and most recently Fargo.
Can you talk about what you have most recently worked on? Are we allowed to talk about it?
You mean my development? Yeah. Or I can't say what I sold, but I sold a pilot off a pitch recently to one of the streaming studios.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So I'm having fun with that.
Cool.
Awesome. Yeah.
All right. Let's go way back. Let's talk a little bit about breaking in. Sarah, you mentioned the writers program, the fellowship rather, that you came in through. What was your background before that? Did you know you wanted to write television? What prompted you to even get involved there?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a huge TV nerd. My mom is a fifth-generation master Navajo tapestry weaver, so she's sort of like the LeBron James of Navajo tapestry weaving. She's like really, really
watch
well.
That show.
Oh my God, we're trying to write that show. But she was an artist, and so but weaving is very sedentary, and so she would give us money and say, go to Blockbuster and get like 5 movies, or like go and we're gonna watch. And so binge watching was like big way before people were binge watching in our house. And we lived in Arizona, so it was always really hot, and so we just stayed kind of indoor kids. And so after college, I majored in creative writing and media arts, and I got this internship at the National Museum of the American Indian at the Smithsonian. I had sort of Googled Native American film internship, and there was like 2 places, and one was the Smithsonian, and so the museum had just been built. It was like the last plot on the mall, and they it was really inspiring and really amazing time, and that sort of turned into a job. And so I was a film programmer for about 5 or 6 years, minus a year in Chicago. Wow. Yeah, and so I got paid to sort of read about movies and watch movies, and there's a huge collection of Native films. And like when I went in, I thought it was like me and this guy Chris Eyre who had made Smoke Signals. I thought they were the only 2 people doing it. And you find out, in North and South America, there's thousands of Native people making movies since the 1920s.
Yeah. So let me stop you here for a second. I'd like to hear more about that. Where do we find these? What is stuff you can recommend that is maybe easily accessible for people?
Well, I mean, I think the Film and Video Center at the National Museum of American Indian is actually very helpful. My old boss, Melissa Bazzani, and there's also another branch in New York, the New York Museum. They have a whole collection there that's searchable and that you can, and they're very open about trying to like help people find films, especially for like festivals and programs and things like that. They do a daily screening and a monthly screening and special events. And then there's just there's a really great Native film community. So I think just, getting on Google and stuff, but Netflix has a lot of things. One of my favorite documentaries, Miss Navajo, which was about the Miss Navajo pageant, made by Billy Luther, is on Netflix. There's a bunch of stuff. You just kind of have to do a little bit of digging.
Sure.
There's indigenous.
Well, I think even that is enough for people to get started.
You can at me at Twitter. I'll help you. But but yeah, no, there's a lot of different. Like the Sundance has its own branch of Native films and a whole component that's been there since the beginning. So there's these really great collectives. Video Nasaldeas. There's like a bunch of places. Asuma TV is like a Alaska Native film channel. You can stream things and you can search a lot of films from there from all over, not just Alaska. But yeah, so it was a great job and I really loved it, but it was hard because I wanted to make film and I wanted to make TV, and I would, host these filmmakers, and then they would leave and I'd have to process their paperwork, and they were on to the next beautiful thing. And I'm like, oh, I really want to do this. And so because it was a government job and I was kind of a lazy 20-something, I would just watch Hulu all day. Like I would do my job, but like Hulu was just always on. It just started. And I saw that there was this program that they offered for Native writers, and I made shorts and written things, but so there was this Native program that they were offering writers because there weren't enough Native writers applying for this big ABC program. And so I used up all my sick leave and all my like weird annual leave. And I went to Santa Fe and I'd written this like terrible 30 Rock. It was like 20 pages and it was a Halloween episode. And it was everything you weren't supposed to do. But there were enough like jokes and stuff in it.
Now let's stop for a second. And I sort of want to hear this from all of you.
Yeah, sorry if I'm, I don't know.
No, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh.
So we should say for most of these fellowships, most of these writing programs, you have to submit a spec of an existing show.
Right.
So you wrote a 30 Rock.
I wrote a 30 Rock.
What were the things, and have you both written specs of existing shows, or have you just written originals?
I have.
You have.
I have, and I've dated by the fact that she was watching Hulu at her job in her 20s. I'm a lot older. So
back when I was Will and Grace.
Right. So mine was Weeds.
That's a great one.
It was really fun to write. And I think a lot more people were doing it when I was breaking in.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, less people. I think to apply to a lot of these programs now, you don't always have to spec, but I always suggest to young writers to write that, because I know a lot of people where their pilot might not have resonated with a showrunner, but they can always pull out that spec and you prove that you can write in someone else's voice.
Yes.
It kind of bums me out that people don't write specs as much anymore, but I get it. So.
I've been sort of banging this drum for the past couple of years because there's value in it.
Yeah.
Right? It's both a learning experience and a good sample to have that does show you can write for
especially
someone
when you're a
else.
staff writer. I feel like what your skills are going to be that are needed in the room at that time is the ability to write in someone's voice much more than, other things.
But I'm curious, you said you did all the things wrong in this.
Yeah, you're not supposed to write a holiday episode. It was supposed to be at least 32 pages. I had like a bunch of guest cast. It was just like really bad, everything that I did. But the guy who taught the class, my mentor, this guy, Jeff Harris, who's amazing and teaches a lot of these programs, he saw something and brought me in, and I wrote a better 30 Rock, and then I applied to the fellowship with that. And when I got back to DC, I was just kind of like, I don't want to do this. And in the late 80s, my mom and her sister had spent a lot of time weaving this giant piece, and it was like this huge rug, and it took them 4 years. It took them 2 years to make, but they didn't talk for 2 years, so altogether it took 4 years to make.
Oh, wow.
But
this is such a good show.
Yeah. But they won Best of Show at the Santa Fe Indie Market. It was the first time in like 80 years a textile had ever won, and it changed our life.
Wow.
Like, it sold for $60,000, and we were on CNN, and it was like this big swing to sort of get off the reservation, even though we hadn't lived there for very long, and just to kind of change their life. My dad went to pharmacy school through that. Wow. My aunt's life changed. She was able to buy a home. It was a really big thing. And my mom was saying, like, sometimes you just got to make a big swing. And so I was, in my 20s, no kids, no marriage yet. I was like, let's do this swing. And so I quit my job, and I broke up with my very nice boyfriend, and I put all my stuff in storage, and I moved out to LA. I'd gotten into another program that was offered to Latino writers. And I ended up getting into the Disney program. And so from that, and so it was just sort of this weird leapfrog kind of fast thing. And then from that, was able to get representation and staff on other shows.
That's amazing.
Have you ever written any Native American characters on any of the shows you've been on?
On Happy Endings, they had this idea that Dave was 1/16 Navajo.
I remember that episode.
Because there was always this thing where people would come up and be like, oh, I'm 1/800th Navajo. Right. Like, can you help me? Like in the museum, they'd always be like, I want to get casino money. And you'd be like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it was always so weird and awkward. And so I would tell those kind of jokey stories, and they're like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if one of the characters thought, that they were distant and stuff. And then I always pitch stuff in every show that I work on, and stuff I'm developing now and things. And but yeah, I'm waiting. I feel like I have enough currency and emotional currency at this point to try to sell something like that.
Yeah, sure. It feels like an untapped world. Like, I feel like people are hungry for new stories.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Well, I think 5 years ago, I had a pilot that I wrote based on working at a trading post, which is stuff my family had done for years. I haven't, but and there was a lot of pushback. But now I think talking to people, I'm like, trans people make up 2% of the population, and Native people make up 2% of the population. And if you told someone 10 years ago there were going to be multiple trans shows on TV, people would think you're crazy. And now there are, And so I think I feel much more emboldened recently to try to get that stuff on the air for sure. Yeah. And there's a lot of other people doing it too. I'm not the only Native TV writer. So.
I'm curious how you made a living when you first came to LA, but before you got the Disney program, because people have asked me that as well recently, so I'm curious how other people did it.
I was really lucky. I moved out here based on the Latino program, and they had a stipend and free housing. Oh, so I stayed there, and I had to literally there was something in the contract that was miswritten, and I thought I was getting free lunch, and I wasn't. And I literally had to be like, you owe me $30 for free lunch. I got everything I could from that program, and they were very wonderful and very supportive. But and then I lived with, on people's couches and stuff, and I cashed in my 401k from the Smithsonian, and then got the program 6 months later. So it was the sort of kind of running and gunning, but I was very lucky. I always tell people, especially assistants, when I worked with them, I would hate me too. It's insane the situation I was in.
I mean, look, it's a big swing.
Yeah.
You went for it. You lived hand to mouth for as long as you had to, and I'm sure you would have for as long as you could. Monica, when people ask, what is your answer? What is your breaking in story?
I was thinking about it, and there's sort of different phases of it, because it's sort of what I did to prepare to come to LA, and then there's sort of the work that I did once I got to LA, and then there's the sort of how I broke in. It's sort of three steps, I did theater for a long time in my 20s. I wanted to be a theater director, and I burnt out on that. But during that time, I got to work with, household name actors and playwrights that were about to win the Pulitzer and stuff like that. All over. I tended to get assistant directing work, like off Broadway, and there were some fellowships for people of color that I also got, like at New York Theater Workshop, and so I was exposed to a lot of great artists, and mostly my job was sitting in the back row of an audience for hours and hours and hours for years, literally, and just watching the audience watch the show and taking notes on like what was landing and what wasn't. So I think in the end, it, absorbing all of that and also just having to see a show over and over and over again, which is kind of mind-numbing at a certain point. But I think the structure of storytelling kind of starts to seep in.
It internalizes,
Yeah.
for sure. Is there anything you remember from that time that you took a specific lesson from?
The main thing that I got out of it was that I didn't want to live hand to mouth anymore. And I felt
TV
like
writing seems like the way to go.
Yeah. I mean, I sort of fell into it because even after I decided to give up theater, I would say to my parents, like, I feel like I'm giving a charitable donation to the theater because I'm making so little money every week, and I just couldn't afford to do that. And I didn't have relatives in New York I could stay with or anything. And so then I very prudently was like, I'm going to be a fiction writer, which also didn't work out. I didn't get into grad schools and stuff. But anyway, a friend of mine told me about the Gotham Writers Workshop, which back in the day, there were these yellow plastic boxes on the corners in New York City. And my friend's brother was like, you know what? There's really good teachers in that program because there's so many good writers in New York who need jobs. And so for $500, you can take this course instead of going and paying thousands for grad school, and you'll get a pretty good.
That's smart. I did spend hundreds of thousands on grad school, so good.
I'm sure it wasn't the equivalent of what you got, but
No.
But I looked at the pamphlet and I was about to sign up for fiction, and it said TV writing, and honestly, it hadn't really occurred to me that people wrote television. I was really, I knew it, but I was like, oh wow, I could potentially go to an office and there's a weekly salary and. It just seemed so stable compared to the way I had been living. And so I took the class, and the guy was the most encouraging person in the world. And the class was 10 people, and then by the end of the class there were only 3, and it was all women, and it was all women of color, and we were the only ones that could keep up with the homework because he wanted us to write so fast. And so really all it did for me was give me a lot of confidence and give me deadlines to write some specs. And I'm still one of the women in the class, is one of my best friends. But he was like, you girls need to go out to LA. They need you. They need your voices out there.
What a great teacher.
Yeah, he really was. And so it was great. And so I ended up sort of cashing in on, I had assisted so many people in theater, and I said, do you guys know anyone in LA that I could meet with, have coffee with, that kind of thing. And because there's some crossover, I met my agent through one of the playwrights that I worked with.
And that's, again, it seems like the sort of story that I've been hearing over and over is you just shake people down, right? It's so much just to get a foothold here, whether it's through a fellowship or whether it's through just people you already know who might have contacts. Who is the person that I can have lunch with? Who will have coffee with me?
Did you have a sample at that point?
Yeah, and so at that time, when I took the class, I took it twice actually, just to give myself the deadlines. And my job at that point was temping for this company, and all of the temps were artists, so it was composers and directors, and the temps were all very cool. And so it was a super boring job, but I could make my own hours, and I basically spent all my weekends and nights working on my scripts. And I was at that point where I think I was 26 or 27, maybe 26, and my friends who had gone to good schools were now getting their law degrees and their medical degrees and all this stuff. And I was I'm a retired theater director. I have no skills, nothing. I don't know how I'm going to be employed in my 30s, And so I was kind of it's now or never. And so I just dedicated myself to it in a way that I tell people, I looked at my friends who became doctors, and I was look at them. They don't sleep. They work around the clock. They don't have time to socialize. You have to work really hard to get what you want. And so instead of going why isn't this happening for me or whatever, I was just I can't complain about that unless I've put in that kind of work. And so I just sort of did that for a while.
That's great. So, and you found the agent through other people. You had a bunch of specs.
I did. I met with the agent. It was the only agent. I had my foot in one door, basically, and he turned me down. And I just remember feeling this panic of like, this is my only shot, you know? And so I wrote him, I think, an email when I got back to Brooklyn, and I said, is there anyone sort of more junior than you who is a little hungry, who might take a gamble on somebody like me? And I sort of played to his, you know, experience and go like, I understand why you wouldn't want me. Like, what have I done, you know? And so luckily he passed my work on to 2 other agents who were way more junior, and they really liked my material. And one was a woman, and I think she really connected with the material in a different way. So I looked out with that, and they said, can you come back to LA as soon as possible? So I did, and I stayed on my godmother's porch, like on her back porch. She had like a...
She wouldn't even let you in the house?
I hope she knows this. It was like a sun porch, you know. She had like Airbnb guests and stuff, so there wasn't room for me. But so I stayed out there, and I was like, you know, this is my shot. And so I moved out here, and then staffing season was basically ending. And so I didn't get staffed, and I had, you know, left my boyfriend like you, Sarah, and I, you know, had left my job and my apartment and everything. And I was like, okay, well, I have the agent, but I have nothing else. So I ended up actually doing research for the Annenberg Center for a while and other odd jobs. I was someone's personal assistant for a while who let me write like at his apartment while I was running errands. Like, so for a while I kind of hustled. And then I got a writing assistant job on Lost, and that's how I first got into TV.
Great. And we'll talk about that in a sec, but that's, I mean, it feels, again, it's not an unusual story to come here and then just, it does feel like a hustle for a year, for 5 years, as long as it takes.
It can be so hard.
Yeah.
I have so many friends from grad school who are still hustling, and I feel for them because I feel like, you know, the ones who made it, there is a certain amount of luck, and once you get in, just like making the most of that opportunity, but it's really tough.
Where was grad school for you?
I went to Columbia.
Okay.
I thought I always wanted to be a historian. My dad is from England. He was born during the Blitz, so I was raised, you know, going to London, hearing these amazing stories about World War II, and he's a history buff, and actually my mom is a printmaker.
Oh, wow.
And I was writing my dissertation in college, my senior year, and just like hating the critical writing, and I took a screenwriting class on a lark, and I was like, I'm going to kill my guidance counselor. This is amazing. Like, it just combined everything I loved about stories, and even though I'm from LA, I had no idea that there was a writer behind movies and television, and 10 years later, I got my first job.
Who grew up here who are like so separated from the industry.
Yeah.
I feel like I was always aware, which is weird. Like, because I remember Brandon Tartikoff hosted, he was like president of NBC in the 80s, and he hosted Saturday Night Live and was on Saved by the Bell. And both of those episodes aired on cable in the same week. And I was like, who is this guy? And my dad had read an article about him because as a kid, he had watched Dennis the Menace, the old, like, Nick, I only saw it at, like, Nick at Night.
It was not a Nick at Night show.
And he was, like, he was miscast. He remember thinking that as a kid, and that's how he knew. And so I, like, did all this research at the library of Brandon Tartikoff and all these shows and who was writing what and, like, Larry Charles and all those people. And so, like, it's always so funny when I hear people say that because I felt like I was, like, I used to beg my dad to drive me to the public library, like, the main library downtown. It would be, like, me and a bunch of homeless people. And I'd be, like, photocopying Premiere Magazine so I could like keep these articles. So I was such a like, but it's good. Like it's a good thing because I feel like the diversity of that, like people who are obsessed with TV and then theater people, like I've worked with so many people from theater who see things so differently. Whereas I feel sometimes I will pitch like the most Borscht Belt stuff just because I was raised on like Laverne and Shirley. And it's like so good to see like, you know, the different points of view.
Yeah, that's so important to have in a room.
Anyway,
yeah, sorry.
So then you decided to go to grad school specifically for
well, I came back for 2 years, and I was PAing a lot, mostly on AFI student films and independent movies.
So let me interrupt for a sec. So once you took the screenwriting class, you were like, that's it. I'm all in.
I'm all in. It was nice to have kind of like a North Star to like design my life around, because I feel like a lot of people, they don't really know what they want to do when they're 20, and that's hard too. But yeah, I came back here and I was PAing. And I have so much respect for everyone who crews and works on set because that is such a tough job. And I was getting in lots of car accidents because I would work so much and then I would drive back and I'd just be tired. And I'd be like, I remember this one trip on the 10, I kept like kind of tapping the back of this car in front of me because I kept falling asleep. This poor person, I could just tell, was getting so mad. But yeah, I couldn't figure out from that how to learn the craft of writing. And because my mom is an artist, I kind of thought, well, if writing doesn't work out, I can always teach if I go to grad school.
Sure.
I did not understand loans. I did not understand that people would just give you money, but then eventually expect you to pay them back. I don't know why I didn't get that. So I went to Columbia, loved living in New York, spent 5 years there and was working in bars and, spent way too much time at grad school, but luckily enough met a great group of people, felt like I was taught by amazing professors and came out here and I wrote an original pilot that got optioned by FTVS and Chernin. And that's kind of how I got my first staff job, but I never wrote a spec before.
Wow.
That's wild.
That's amazing.
So in school, what were the kinds of things you were writing?
It was all features, and New York and Columbia is very geared to more kind of independent features. So it wasn't really so much my voice. I was writing a lot of stuff to try to get it made by director friends.
Yeah.
And then the pilot that I wrote that got optioned is like a big world building. The world is run by mummies, but it starts in the 1930s and it's like an alternate history. Yeah. It was crazy. But I think
left to your own devices, this is the sort of thing you'd be writing. That's interesting. But you weren't really given that opportunity in school.
Well, it was just, I loved my experience at Columbia, but it is very much a New York independent film kind of school, which was great too. And I love features. So TV is not necessarily where I thought I would end up, but this is where the jobs are.
Yeah.
And how did you make the connection from the school to the, you said Chernin office?
I came out, and because I'm from LA, I was lucky enough to be living at home. And I wrote this pilot, and I was out at a bar in Silver Lake, and a friend of a friend, and her boyfriend was there, and he was a writer, and we just started talking. We we're into the same stuff, and he was so sweet. He asked to read something. He read it, sent it on to his manager. I signed with him, and then from that I got an agent, and they send it out around town. But it was really, and I don't even love to go out that much, but it is important to just go out and meet people in LA, and for writers to help each other too.
I think it's like, again, it's hard for writers to go out and do that. I think there's a certain personality type that, we tend to want to stay home. And
I do think, though, that life is so important for writing. I find when I'm writing, like everything I read, I use, all my experiences. And sometimes people get in this zone where it's like, I can't do anything but write. And I just don't know if that's necessarily the best for your process.
Yeah. So what are you all doing these days to get out of your own heads and make time to live life?
I just had
a baby, so I don't do any of that. Yeah. No.
That counts as experience.
Experience, right? No, I'm trying to think. I have a lot of hobbies. I do a lot of crafting and stuff. I write at a Korean spa, which is nice because it's like
that's amazing. What I do, so. You're like the most interesting writer in Los Angeles.
No, not at all.
Walk me through that.
That's awesome. Because I have a lot of anxiety, and so what I'll do is I found that
now you sound like a comedy.
There we go. Right here we are. So I always will kind of freeze up if I have a task to do, and so Korean spa is predominantly Korean people, so there's not a lot of English being spoken, which is nice. So you're just sort of in your head and your thoughts. And then the internet's spotty, so it's hard. So I'm not always on my phone, not always on the. And then I'll say okay, I'm gonna write and eat just a shit ton of bulgogi and then write for 3 hours and then I'll put it all in the locker and I'll go sit in a hot tub, and it's like a $15 entry. It's not like a fancy spot. It's but and I'll just sit in a hot tub and then I'll start to think about stuff. I'm like, oh, that could be a joke, or that could be funny, or this could be better. I should do this. And then I get dressed and then I go back and write some more. And there's like a patio where everyone smokes, so you can go up there. So you just kind of keep moving floors so the environment's different.
Do you get a massage while you're there?
No, it's just not relaxing. It's so fun because I'm always like, I'm gonna get a massage at 10, and then I waste time, and then I never end up actually doing that part of the relaxation. And it's fun. You hear sorority girls gossiping about their boyfriends, or you see families fighting, or you see marital disputes or something. So it's a lot of people. I find, I don't know. I love LA. I hate people who slag on LA, but it's hard when you're always in your car.
Yeah.
Whereas when I was in DC, you would be on the train and you would see people fighting or see people talking, or you'd have random conversations. And I find like there's a lot of old ladies that always need help, like putting their headphones on or doing things like I'll help them. Like it's a nice weird like youth hostily kind of vibe. And so I find that is helpful to my process.
That's fascinating because it's similar to my process, but it's totally different than my process. Because I go to cafes, but then I walk. And so, like, instead of going up and down floors like you do, I just walk to the next cafe for, like, the next work block. I'll, like, walk around, and I find that I can't sit that long. And then the walking, like, is where I start to sort of process stuff in my mind, or stuff will just pop into my head.
Yeah, I used to try to, like, punish myself and just sit all the time and be like, it should come. And then there was this, I took a writing class that that guy Jeff had taught, and the guy who created MacGyver came and spoke, and he was saying how he had like a wood shop and he has a bunch of puzzles, and he was saying that the reason why your brain needs, like, what is it called? Like, not your subconscious or whatever, needs to kind of play around. And so you should be like focused on a task for a while. And then the reason why we have ideas when we're showering or when we're driving is because our body, like 40% of it has to pay attention to that activity. And then the subconscious gets to kind of like figure out what it wants to do.
Sure.
And so he was like, now I create those situations. So he's like, I'll go build something in a wood shop, or I'll do a puzzle. And so I like don't feel as guilty for like going and sitting in a hot tub or doing something else with my hands or weaving or whatever to kind of get my brain working in that way.
Yeah. Doing something with your hands, taking a walk, are things we hear a lot. And it's not video games either. Like anything story-based is going to get in your way, I feel like.
Yeah.
Watching TV doesn't always do it.
I know. I still do that. I'll do it during like the dumb draft part. I'll just have something on, but yeah, it's not
for
good.
Noise.
Yeah,
that background noise. Grainne, when you are on script,
I'm on script right now, so this is a good question.
What does a typical day, a writing day, look like for you?
Well, this week was weird. Usually our showrunner, Phil Clemmer, who's lovely, kind of likes us to write in the office so we can dip into the room. So you end up being like, oh, just come in the room for a little bit. And then you're like, but wait, what am I going to? But this week, my mom just had a double knee surgery. So I was writing in the hospital with her, which was a surprisingly great place to write. You know, people are always coming in and out and helping her out. But I think first thing in the morning is the best before you're cluttered with the day and before you start to just get inside your own head. I would love to just be able to like get up and write and then take a break or work out later.
Yeah, I will say, I don't often interject in here, but this is a realization I had only recently, which is if you are writing something, if you can get out of your own time zone, highly recommended.
Oh, you mean like go somewhere?
I was just on vacation and I got more done because I was 3 hours ahead of LA, so I didn't have to deal with emails. Nobody here was awake yet. And I could work from like 8 to 11.
That's why the life of a feature writer is so seductive, because you're like, I'm going to go write in Paris. Or
Must be nice.
Yeah.
Must be nice, feature writers. I want to talk a little bit about some of the specific shows that you all have worked on and what you took from those experiences as far as lessons for practical writing stuff or being in a room or when it's time to run your own show. I'm curious about happy endings. Sierra, you were there for 3 years, for 3 seasons. It was a great show. It seemed like it was a happy room.
It was the best. From
what I've heard.
Yeah.
That was David Kasp's show, right?
David Kasp's show. He created it, and then Jonathan Groff was showrunner, and then Josh Bicel, the second season he was like the number 2 on. He was a co-EP first season, and then was like an EP the second season. So it was like the 3 of them running it.
But Kasp has been here, and Groff has been on a couple times and talked about it, and he's so good.
They're the best.
So what do you take from these guys, from this room? Again, this is your first room experience.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's such a hard question. It was David's first job in television, and it was my first job in television, which was awesome if you can get that, because any like dumb question I was going to ask, he would ask often. And so I could just kind of be quiet and sort of learn. And then Groff was a great teacher and was really good at knowing like who I was and what I had to offer. And I think before even I knew, like I was really more of like a story person. And then he had hired a lot of these like amazing improvisers. He'd hired a lot of these amazing teams. And like it was almost like he was putting together like a baseball team, him and Cass. But I interviewed only with Groff. So in my head, the way I remember it, it's him, but it was really the both of them. And they were just a great marriage. Like it was David's first job in TV, but he knew so great at what he didn't know, and then he knew what he did know. So the moments where he was like, no, I'm passionate about this, and I know that this is going to work, and he didn't do that for everything. He knew, like, okay, this guy's smart, this guy's, worked on shows before. There was a lot of trust between the two of them, and so that was one thing I learned was like, that it's okay to say that you don't know, but it's also like, pick your spots and know when to fight for your vision and know, and they were both just really good people and nice people and very willing to teach and very excited to mentor, but at the same time led by example. It was a really great room. And then I think as a Disney fellow, there was like 20 some writers in the room. There was so many. There was a lot of teams. Wow. There were 10 staff writers, and I was one.
Comedy is so different.
Comedy is so different. It's these huge rooms, and it was like.
Did you break it into groups a lot?
We did initially. So the first couple weeks, it's all kind of blue sky. You're saying like, what do we think these characters are? Who do we? And David had a lot of thoughts of like what that was. Jonathan had ideas. Myself had ideas, and then it was sort of like what was nice about it was they weren't like older writers, but the show was set in Chicago. I lived in Chicago about friends in their 20s. I was in my 20s. And so they'd had a lot of stories, but there were certain things I remember like I lived in Chicago with these 3 people, and we lived by a firehouse, and we always used to talk about when the zombie apocalypse comes, like, what's our plan? And it was just this fun thing to do. And I would say, like, okay, well, we have to go to the firehouse and get weapons. And then there's a Dunkin' Donuts, we'll get donuts. And you'll go get weed. And, like, we'll do this, blah, blah, blah. And so I remember, like, explaining that just as a joke. And one of the upper-level writers being like, well, that's a story. Like, that's an episode. And so then we did this, like, zombie episode. And it wasn't based on my thing. We didn't do the exact thing in my life. But it was interesting to see them sort of be like, that's a story. And I didn't know you could just do that. Like, talk about your life and then make something. Or there were 2 writers that loved to watch a lot of YouTube videos. So we'd, like, watch videos. And I was such a Smithsonian teacher's pet. I'd be like, all right, guys, let's get back to it. Even though I'd never worked in TV before. And then one of those YouTube videos became an episode. It started this sort of chain reaction. And I was like, oh, you can just... So it was just a great learning experience in that way.
That's neat.
But you never really know, like, how unfunny you are until you get into that first room. Just how I was so scared. I was so petrified. I didn't talk for the first, like, week. And I could tell, like, they were looking at me like, you need to talk. You need to,
Did anyone say anything?
Nobody said anything because it's also just a big room and they're trying to get stuff up. And I was so low on the scale of like people's problems. And so I wasn't loud and obnoxious and distracting, but I wasn't like adding anything either. Yeah. And so, And so I went into Prentice's office because he was the only other writer of color on the show, and I just was like, hey man, we're gonna be best friends. You just tell me what I need to do. And he thankfully was so nice. He didn't coddle me, but he was like, he said the showrunners are the painters and we're the paint. And so he's like, so when they need green, if you're green, then be green. He's like, but if they need red, don't try to be red. He's like, just figure out what color you are and then be there when they need that color. And it like really shifted my thing. So I realized like I'm a story person, I'm a structure person. And so I'm not going to be funnier than these like improvisers who've been working on, for 10 years. Like it's just never going to happen. So I would just wait until they needed a story fix or they needed research or they needed something. And that's when I was able to just like activate. And then as time went on, I started pitching jokes. I started, and you start to get better at all the other stuff.
You learn those other tools.
Yeah. And so, but that was like the best advice I ever got. And that's what I always tell people when I'm on like panels and stuff.
It's great advice. Grainne, what was the entry for you? What was Tomorrow People the first thing? And was it a staff job?
It was a staff writing job, and there was one other woman on the show who was a consulting producer, Pam Vise, who was awesome.
Oh, she's great.
Yeah. And she kind of stepped away, I believe, mid-season. And, I think part of the reason I got hired and didn't have to move up through the assistant ranks was because they wanted a female writer. And, I was so lucky, like you, with my first staff job. It was this group of people who were so supportive and lovely, and everybody had worked a lot more in TV. But I did feel very prepared from grad school and just, sitting around taking classes, giving your friends notes. It felt like this is kind of what TV was. And also my showrunner, who is now my showrunner again, Phil Klemmer, he's somebody who wants writers to be empowered and take control of their episode and see it through from casting through production. So I would go to Vancouver and some of prep, and usually for the whole episode, which is such a learning experience. And I did feel comfortable just because I had spent 2 years working on sets. But it was a great experience. I have been on other shows that were different, and I just wish, I know, right now we all talk about the Me Too movement, which is so important, but I wish there was also just a no asshole movement because there's so many problems in rooms that just happen when your boss is kind of an asshole. And I think people write better when they feel comfortable, when they feel valued, when they feel empowered. And it just seems so obvious to me. I don't know why. I mean, I understand the show running job is very stressful, but people cannot produce their best material if they're scared and feel belittled.
Was it easy for you to sort of step into these probably more seasoned with these more seasoned writers and have ownership of the material?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, the biggest learning curve coming from Columbia independent feature films, I mean, I always liked feature writing too, is that TV is so much about what your showrunner wants, and you can be rewritten, and you usually are rewritten, and I was kind of like, my baby, what are you doing?
So tell me about dealing with that, because I know for a lot of writers that can be difficult.
I mean, I told myself I would never cry in the office, but that first year there were some tears, but it was just part of the learning experience. I also had a lot to learn and did learn. Like sometimes I think about when I see staff writers now, like, you will grow so much. Like, you don't have to worry about it. Just by being on shows, you'll grow. But it's really hard. I mean, I think anybody who turns in something and the thing that's published is markedly different. Sure. It's a struggle, to get your ego around that. But
absolutely. I think I was given good advice on my first staff job, which was like, if 20% of what you wrote gets through to that final version, then you've done a really good job.
Yeah. I also think as you get to know the show better and the showrunner better, you can more curve it to their taste.
Yeah, for sure. And then the being on set stuff, I assume there were student films and you had that experience at Columbia. Was it similar? Did you know what to do on set?
Yes, except there was just so much more money, and the food and the crafting was so much. I was so excited.
It's still CW, so not that much.
Oh man, compared to like being in New York, doing every job. I love being on set still. I feel like it's such an important part of the process to understand.
What do you see as your role there as the writer of the episode or producer of the episode?
Well, we try to pack so much into so short a time, and our scripts are long. We have these big action set pieces. So oftentimes it's kind of working with the producer on set just to figure out maybe if there's any cuts we can have. I mean, of course, working with the actors. Thankfully, on the show I am now, like, actors have opinions and they're not meat puppets and they want to change lines, and it's helpful if there's a writer who's there who can kind of work with them. And, our actors are brilliant and know their characters so well, but sometimes they're also only thinking about their character in this scene versus the whole episode. So kind of being there for that. And I don't know, I think being a cheerleader, I mean, when you're in Vancouver and you're working on crew, you're so divorced from what's going on in LA. And sometimes the actors, I feel like, can feel like, where am I? What am I doing? And just like showing up and just saying, we appreciate you guys from like the Greens department. It was funny, a staff writer had just been on set. He was like, I didn't even know what the Greens department was. And like, I don't know, I think it makes a big difference to like go up there and show people that you appreciate and you're going to be in the trenches with them.
Yeah. Monica, so you got this writer's assistant job or writer's PA job?
It was assistant, yeah.
Which is an enormous responsibility on Lost.
Yeah.
Enormous.
It was actually divided between me and another guy because it was so big.
Yeah, and that was a big room. What season was this?
It was season 4.
Oh, okay. And
there were 10 writers.
Yeah. That must have been an incredible learning curve for you.
Yeah, it was my grad school, basically. It was an amazing, group of writers in the room. I wasn't really there to contribute anything except, take notes. And so I was just listening and observing and seeing how they did it and what worked and what didn't. And and I had to record everything on a tape, and then I would have to play the tape at night and make sure I caught every riff or every thing. So it was sort of like Groundhog Day, where I would take a break, I'd have dinner, and then I would listen to my entire day over again.
That's terrible.
And so, like, in my sleep, I would start to hear the writers' voices in my head. Like, sometimes I'd only get 3 hours of sleep, and it was really crazy, but it was an amazing education.
I'm sure. What was stuff that maybe you took from that taught you about thriving in subsequent rooms?
I think it's a combo of the craft that I learned in the room, stuff like, how to break story for so many characters. We would have or they would have 23 to 26 characters in an episode sometimes, in the future, in the past, in the present. And a lot of the shows I've worked on since then have, are character-driven ensembles. So that and I took a lot of, I was particularly impressed by how certain writers in that room, when they got stuck on something, how they would get unstuck.
What were some of that? What some of those techniques, do you remember? Or anything that you use yourself?
I'm trying to remember. I think one time I remember they were stuck on something, and it was sort of like, well, what if we try the opposite? Or, what if we don't do that at all? Or, just the sort of improvisational mindset of just being able to throw something out and look at it in a different way, I've found really useful. And, in any room, and two of my best friends are improvisers in London. I actually used to write screenplays with them. And I didn't know anything about improv, but they have such an improv mentality that I picked up stuff from them, and I took one of their classes in London. And now I realize, like, when I'm doing features or even pilots, you are constantly getting notes from executives, and the improv stuff, it's always coming up of, like, well, how can I solve this thing that they're stuck on or that they are not seeing the way that I'm seeing? And that idea of just being able to let go and come up with another idea, I think is so important to anyone who wants to be in a room. Because, the ability to let go is very important.
Absolutely. And not always easy for new writers. I mean, we were just mentioning this a second ago, but for new writers especially, you tend to be precious. Was this something that you had to experience to learn, or were you able to do it in a safe way as the writer's assistant?
I think I saw it so much that I wasn't someone who was super dug in. I think we all have our ideas that we get really excited about, and it's hard when it's not embraced,
Did you pitch in that room? Or?
No, not really. We could pitch a little bit on the side to one of the writers who was mentoring us, and sometimes she would, bring a pitch of ours in and then give us credit or something like that.
Was that formally stated that she was mentoring?
No, she just sort of, it was Liz Sarnoff. Yeah,
she's
she's great. And she, she just went out of her way to kind of, pay attention to us, which was great.
That's really valuable.
Yeah.
And then it looks like the next place you landed was the Kadam's camp. Is that right?
Yeah. So, the first person who gave me a job was Oliver Goldstick on Lipstick Jungle. It was season 2 of Lipstick Jungle. And it had been more comedy-based for the first season, then they wanted to go drama-based. But it was sort of a sinking ship. And so it was a really intense first job. Because it was sort of like, there was a lot of at stake. And, and the great thing for me was I was a staff writer, and there was a lot. It was very upper level heavy. And like Sarah, I had just been in New York, and I was in my 20s, and they were like, we need someone who's like knows what's going on in New York and what's cool and whatever. So I was kind of hired for that. And then Oliver is a playwright as well, so the theater thing came up. And I say this when I mentor people, like when you're in an interview with a showrunner, I don't always meet with them the same way. Like with Oliver, I really emphasized my theater background. And, with someone like Noah Hawley, that's not something I would focus on. But for Oliver, that's sort of how we connected. And he liked looked in my specs that my secondary characters had a strong voice, and he said it's unusual, for the and he was like, that's what I need because I know my main characters, but I haven't put as much thought into the secondary characters. And actually, when I met with Kadams, he said something similar.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and so I was actually unemployed for about 9 or 10 months after Lipstick Jungle went down. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to afford to stay in LA. And I was, Michael Jackson died. There was just like so many things going, that were sad. I just wasn't sure what to do. And I thought, well, who's going to be interested in me? Like one hit wonder. She was a staff writer on a failed show. I was like, I could sort of see that was going to be it. And so I read all the pilots that season, and I said, to my manager, my agent at the time, when I read the Parenthood pilot, it was originally in Philadelphia, which is where I'm from, and there was just something about the way Jason wrote. I just felt a connection in the writing, and I called my agent and my manager, and I said, I don't care if you can only get me one meeting this staffing season. I really, really, really want to meet on this. I just think I can write this. And so he just called and called and called and called and bugged them. And then I finally got a meeting. And it was such an incredible meeting because I just sat down with Jason, and after I want to say 6 minutes, he kind of felt like someone who was my family or something. And he just looked at me and he said, "Are you sure you wouldn't be better for Friday Night Lights?" And my heart stopped, and I just was like, "Oh my God, are you serious?" And he was like, "Yeah," because my mom worked with a basketball team in a underprivileged high school for a long time. My parents are kind of like, Tammy and Coach without all the glory, but in that moment, I was kind of like, if I try to talk myself into a job on Friday Night Lights that doesn't really exist and out of the one on Parenthood, I might end up with 0 jobs. So I was really nervous. So I said a little bit, but then I brought the conversation back to Parenthood because I didn't want to screw myself out of both. But I ended up working on both.
Let's talk for a second about the Kadams rooms because it's been a couple of years since I've had to or gotten to. And there are writers who really thrive there. There are writers who really do well there. And there are writers who really had trouble there too because they could be emotional rooms. They're very honest rooms. Think about your experience.
Yeah, you've probably heard we had Cry a Lot Wednesdays we would joke about. I think one of the main things I learned there was emotional storytelling and how to just sort of beat out character arcs in a story emotionally. I don't know. I think it's hard to say, but I do think, Jason is sort of a quieter person. And so I think that first season when I was on Parenthood, the thing that clicked for me, sort of like what you were saying, Sarah, about the color advice that you got from Prentice, was I would notice that sometimes Jason would say something he was looking for, like he was looking for green, and people would start pitching red. And I was sort of quiet, and I would think well, people aren't really answering the question that he asked. And so I would just think for a while, and the conversation would go elsewhere, and I would still try to answer the question that he had come in with. And so I got a couple of those in a row, and then I was like, okay, I sort of get this now. And some of that is a skill that I think is important, which is when somebody comes in with a thing they want to show, how do you dramatize that with the characters, you know? And so that's something that I try to show when I help people that I'm mentoring, or, people get notes. Well, I understand the note, but I don't know how to address the note. It's sort of like, how do you come up with the pitch or the scene that's going to show the thing that they want to get across? Which is,
this is basic screenwriting, but it's a thing I think a lot of us forget to keep in the front of our heads, right? It's an active dramatic medium. And so any emotions have to come, or any actions or whatever it is, has to come through action, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. I'm curious to hear from all of you as we start to wrap up, what is something you wish you had been told early on? What is something that either it took you a while to learn, or when you did learn it was like, oh, of course that? whether it's about process or getting along, business, whatever it is?
I mean, just a small one is befriend the editor and ask and before you go on set, interview them about what the showrunner likes and what they don't like and how to do coverage. Because like I didn't know how to do coverage. I'd worked on film sets and stuff, but you're so busy bringing bagels or whatever, you don't really know what you're doing. And so I was really bad on set for the first 2 episodes, and I would give notes at the wrong time. So you'd be getting coverage on another person, and I'd say, well, we should get one this way for this other actor. And they're like, well, we've already shot their coverage. And I didn't know what that meant, and it was just a nightmare. And so I had befriended the editor, and she's like, oh, I can take you through. And she showed me how to do it. And then from learning how to do that and also learning what the showrunner likes, what performances they don't like. And they see everything. They see what, if the actors, which actors know their lines and which ones don't, like all of this, they just have all the gossip. And so she downloaded me on everything, and it was very helpful. And then the next episode, it was like night and day in terms of like what I was able to offer. Wow. And so now whenever like I try to help staff writers, I always ask if they know how to do coverage and show them. And it depends, like, traditional sitcoms, usually it's like you start the wide, and then when you go in for the close-ups, that's often when like actors will sort of turn on a little bit more, and because they know Superstore, we did everything in a wide to a medium, so we never really used close-ups. And so then
Why was that?
Just because it's the style that the showrunner had come off The Office and liked to do a lot of like camera movement, a lot of like kind of dirty takes and things like that, and so found shots and things in the foreground. And so then you'd have to tell the director, he'd be waiting for the close-ups. He's like, we'll get in coverage. And I'm like, no, we won't, because we can't use those. Like, we have to use these. And so just knowing that and talking more to the editor, even as like an upper level writer, to know what the showrunner liked, what the upper levels liked, it was really helpful. And so at every level that I've been at, talking to the editor and befriending the editor has always been really beneficial.
That's really cool. I had not heard that before. And I think part of that too is, find out anything you can about what the showrunner wants.
No, definitely.
Right? Like if there's someone who's been there longer or worked with this person before, that's helpful.
Yeah. I think it's always like, being a surrogate. It's like I always tell people, because like I'll work with writers sometimes and they get very precious about the writing, and I'll say, we're having this person's baby. So it feels like our baby because we're birthing it, we're growing it, and we're eating all the things. But ultimately, you're going to have this baby, and then you're going to give it to that person, and they get to raise it, and they're going to get all the glory. Like, it's not our baby. And so I think like the more you can kind of figure out like what that person wants and what they need, the easier the experience is for everybody.
Absolutely. That's great. Grainne, what is something that you would like to impart?
Well, I've talked about this before, but I feel like in a room, listening is so important. And as I, move up and sometimes when the room, really working on like whatever idea comes, like don't discount it. There's something there. I get really frustrated when I see people like interrupting each other, or like I can almost see sometimes when people are thinking of the thing to say rather than just like taking it in. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like it's a good skill that'll serve you well in dinner parties too, but really like just trying to listen and kind of see the nugget in anyone's idea, which I, continually work on. But I feel like, there's usually something there and people can build on it, and, the whole yes and thing. But yeah, listening.
Yeah, there's a flow to a conversation, right? In a room or at a dinner party, and finding your way into it rather than asserting your way into it. There's a big difference. Yeah. Monica, what about you?
I really like the smaller rooms, so that I think it would be difficult for me to go back to a larger room, partly for that reason that Grainne was describing. Like on Fargo, we only had 4 writers.
Whoa, that is small.
Yeah, that idea of sort of everybody having sort of an equal voice and having experience not to do that and not to negate something unless you have something to replace it is sort of a basic, thing that's important to know. The other thing, I think the thing that was hardest for me was I spent so much time in the rooms on my shows, and I didn't get a lot of production experience. So I felt like I got to exercise the muscle of breaking story so much, but I didn't get as much experience exercising the muscle from like outline to script or script to rewriting, because the upper level people would do the other drafts and stuff. So one thing, I find is the skill that is the hardest to do unless you're, writing tons of scripts is, you can pitch the characters and you can come up with the story beats, but then how do you take, something that the room outlined and give it the life of a scene? That step for me was the hardest and sort of last step. And I had a lot of writers help me along the way with that.
What was some advice they gave you?
It's so hard to say because it's so specific to those scenes. But I think the thing that I got most out of it was sort of point of view.
Yeah.
It's easy to write scenes on sort of like a like your bird's eye, and you're kind of watching two characters in a bedroom talk about something, but actually like deciding I'm going to lean more into like this character in this scene is experiencing this than the other, and how would I tell that differently rather than sort of in a proscenium kind of way of looking at the scene. That changed a lot of my writing.
Yeah. I find that so important. It's hard when there's 8 people in a scene, but like that's what cinema is, really being with one person and their secrets and their feelings.
Yeah. Can you do that for a scene with 8 people and do it 8 times? Like I remember, I think it was Melissa, what's her name, who wrote E.T.
Oh, Rosenberg.
Something like that.
I forget. Yeah.
Anyway,
she's amazing.
the writer of E.T. Let's cut out that part.
Yeah.
I remember hearing advice from the writer of E.T. saying that she would do a draft that was sort of that bird's eye view, but then she'd go back through and do a draft from every character's point of view.
Yeah.
And it informed every scene and really every moment in a different way.
But can a scene be from multiple characters' point of view? That's the thing that's tricky. I feel like you really do want to be more with one person than anyone else.
We did that a lot. Oh, sorry.
Well, like I'm working on a show called Splitting Up Together, and it's really interesting because it's a comedy, but we do a lot of, we're like, the show's not afraid to do like dramatic sort of fights between these couples or marital sort of kind of debates. And it has been really interesting because I feel like those are fun scenes to write because in a marriage, they both have point of views. And so it's like if you can kind of make it, we always talk about like making it a fair fight, So it's like some people in the room I think are team one person and the other one or team, Martin and you want to, but it is nice to, I think, to go back and kind of figure out like, it's never going to be totally fair and balanced, but like, is there a moment in this scene where I can see his point and then I can see her point, because then that's when you really feel bad, especially in this time where it's like a character that have gotten divorced. You do want to feel that sort of loss, and I think it can be, but I don't know about 8 people. That sounds like I'm trying to figure out 2 people. Like
even at its base, you're getting to an honesty from every character.
Yeah.
Right? No character is just speaking to speak or to move the plot.
Oh,
along,
yeah.
Well, I think party scenes are great for that. We did that a lot on Parenthood and Friday Night Lights, where you have a party and so you're gonna have like angle on and you'll go and have a duet or a trio between different characters, and you kind of move around the room and pay off some story points that way.
Crazy Rich Asians I just watched, and they did a great job of that, where it's like everyone has a story and you're clocking it from the beginning, and then you kind of see, especially I think in families, that's always nice because it's like everyone has to play this role, and this daughter is the favorite or this son is the least favorite or whatever. And it was great to kind of watch these like sweeping scenes where like everyone had a moment,
Yeah.
And I think this also comes to, I think, something that people responded to in your early specs is that these tertiary characters had lives of their own, right? I mean, this is something that my partner and I have tried to write is like, any secondary character could be his own show and is in fact living in his own show.
Yeah, and you shouldn't be able to just kind of swap dialogue around. They should have a really specific voice.
Absolutely. This is all great advice. I'm so sorry we have to wrap up. I could go another hour with you 3. But let's wrap up anyway by talking about what you are watching on TV these days. What is getting you, I'm coming to you first. What is getting you excited or inspired? What are you talking about with your friends, with your loved ones? What do you wish you were watching?
I'll go first. I'll save you. I've been so excited by Castle Rock. I just feel like it's brilliant top to bottom, acting, directing, and there's such a sense of mystery that's propelling it. And I just love that tone and feel like it's a very hard tone to hit as a writer because you're like, how much information do I give? How much do I not? And if you say the mystery, it's probably like, oh, well, yeah. But like the way they dose it out, it's so just addictive.
That's a good one.
That's awesome.
I heard great things about the Sissy Spacek episode where she's paranoid, and I need to check that out.
What have you watched?
So I have 2 kids under 5, and I'm writing a feature and a pilot and a graphic novel right now. So I'm not really watching anything to be totally Paw Patrol.
I watch Cars 3. I watch Cars 3 like I watch it twice a day. And I've learned so much about story from Cars 3. It's so I can't even tell you about. I'm sorry to like.
No, that makes so much sense because the structure of those movies is perfect.
They're so perfect, but like, okay, I'm not gonna get too much into Cars 3, but. Because,
save it for our Cars 3 podcast.
Yes, I mean, I could do a whole podcast on it. But one of my friends was talking about trying to write a pilot from 2 different people's perspectives where they're like both sort of the protagonists. And I was like, watch Cars 3 because they actually were able to do the save the cat beats for
That's
like
amazing.
both characters. And you kind of don't see it coming. But it's weird when you watch those like simple stories. Sometimes I feel like it's
Should we
better.
skip Cars 1 and 2?
You can't. I definitely skip 2. 1 has a lot of value to it, but it was of a
And it has
time.
Paul Newman's. It's his last movie.
Yeah.
What?
So it's worth seeing. Yeah.
That is crazy
Even
trivia.
Cars 3, they pulled
use
some
his
audio.
voice,
Yeah. But you're very busy. You don't have time.
If you guys have young kids, my sister's a writer on Muppet Babies, so I would check that
Oh,
out.
I will. I'd watch that for me.
It looks real good.
Yeah, it's really sweet.
That's great. Sarah, you're watching everything, right?
I watch a lot of TV. Yeah, no, I watch too much
Good. I'm
television.
glad you're here.
It's terrible. No, I wait though. I wait like 4 months. So like I just watched The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which was
I did too.
so good. I was never a huge Gilmore Girls person, but I loved how like Mad Men, I feel like he was like, it was 72 degrees, so you can't wear a coat on this day in May. And she's like, I had lunch with Lenny Bruce. Like, it's just like so open and wonderful.
Yes.
I like love that. I watch Harlots. I like a lot of trashy stuff.
I heard Harlots is not trashy. I heard it's good.
It reminds me of like early Showtime, like bunch of sex scenes for no reason, but then like really good acting, really good performances.
Right.
And I'm in a love-hate relationship with The Handmaid's Tale. I feel like
I
it's like,
can't do it. I
it's like
can't do it.
abuse.
Clitorectomies. I'm out.
I know. It's so good, but it's also like there's some issues. But I can't not watch it. I watch it. And then Insecure. I
Insecure is
love
so
that show
good.
I
so
forgot
much.
it started.
It started. Yeah, it's
Awesome.
so good. It's like. It's the only show I watch on my phone so that I'm not on my phone. So I will like take a bath and just watch it on my phone.
Does
I'm like,
Prentice know this? You might want you to watch it on like a big screen.
It's 2 inches from my face, so it's like it's a big screen. But no one talks to me, no one bothers me. Like
That's so funny.
the shows I like pay the most attention to, and it's so good.
The ones I have on deck are Barry and BoJack Horseman because I haven't watched BoJack Horseman and I feel like it's a big hole in my watching.
I love BoJack. And Barry's
and
great.
Barry I want
Barry's
to
so
watch.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are good answers. Thank you, guys. Thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. Good
Thanks
luck
for
with
having
all
us.
future endeavors. I'm excited for what you all are up to as well. So,
Likewise.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Writers Panel. Tune in next Tuesday and every Tuesday for a brand new episode. And in the meantime, please subscribe and review the Writers Panel on Apple Podcasts or on your favorite podcast app. And follow me on Twitter @BenBlacker, just like it sounds. And let me know who you want to have on the show. The Writers Panel is a co-production of the Forever Dog Podcast Network and the ATX Television Festival. You can listen to more Forever Dog podcasts at foreverdogpodcast.com and keep up with the ATX Fest throughout the year at atxfestival.com. Thank you, and see you next week. Well, you'll hear me next week. Thanks for subscribing.
Forever Dog.
This has been a Forever Dog production. Executive produced by Brett Boehm, Joe Cilio, and Alex Ramsey. For more original podcasts, please visit foreverdogpodcasts.com and subscribe to our shows on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Keep up with the latest Forever Dog news by following us on Twitter and Instagram @ForeverDogTeam and liking our page on Facebook.